And Saturday night, when police say she was cut off by another car, she lost control of her SUV. It then slammed into the curb line and flipped onto its side. Lucio died at the scene.
She was just a very dear, very nice person, and much love, and I'm so sorry for their family.
Very active at Conrad's Bellman High School. We had daughters. I feel sorry for the 3 girls. I know she's got 3 girls.
Lucio's 16-year-old daughter was in the passenger seat.
Okay, okay, it's March 23rd, 2018, 9:39 a.m. Looks like I'm going to miss breakfast because I have to record this. It's just so outrageous. It was even stronger just about 2 minutes ago. It was like creating a huge cloud that you could see through. This window, I've got all kinds of film on it. And it's just amazing how black it was out there. It's creating just like a smog machine. So once again, it's March 23rd, 2018, 9:39 a.m. 255 West 43rd Street, looking northwest at the twin chimneys belonging to John's Pizzeria. They're located at 260 West 44th Street.
payroll and borrow money is so, the liquidity is so generally abundant that is it something that I'm hearing other really smart investors raise? Yes. Do people have their eye in it for the right reasons? Yes. Are we anywhere near close to this being a driver of downside? I don't think so.
Jonathan Gollop, the Credit Suisse. Been great to catch up with you over the last hour. To Gordon Johnson of Vertical Group. As to you, sir, Bloomberg's Romain Bostic, thank you very much. We're about 25 minutes into the session here in the United States of America. We continue to drain some of the drama out of risk assets. Up just 0.1% on the Dow, dead flat on the S&P 500. We do find some stability after yesterday's one-day rout. From New York, this is Bloomberg.
People don't invest in stocks and bonds. They don't invest in alternatives or municipal strategies. What people really invest in is what they hope to get out of life. But helping them get there means you can't approach investing from just one point of view. Because it's only when you collaborate and cross-pollinate many points of view that something wonderful can happen. Those people might just get what they want out of life. Or they could get even more.
The moment a fish is pulled up from the water, it's a race against time. And keeping it in the right conditions is the best way to get that fish to your plate safely.
Sometimes a product arrives and the cold chain has been interrupted, and we need to be able to identify where in the cold chain that occurred.
We took our world-class network and we developed devices to track environmental conditions. This device allows people to understand what's happening with the location, but also if it's too hot, if it's too cold, if it's been dropped. It's completely unique.
If you have a sensor that can keep track of your product, it keeps everybody kind of honest that way.
Who knew a tiny sensor could help keep the food chain safe?
In life, you have to adapt to your environment. That's why Jaguar has developed a unique, instinctive all-wheel drive system. It constantly monitors the road surface and driver inputs hundreds of times every second. Perfect dynamics, outstanding performance all year round. Jaguar all-wheel drive.
This is Bloomberg Markets, The Open. I'm Kaylee Lyons here in the Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Green Room. Coming up in the next hour of Bloomberg Markets, Neil Kashkari, Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis president.
About 17 minutes into the session in New York City, the story cross-asset as follows after yesterday's big drop, the biggest one-day drop in about 6 weeks. We do find some stability but some softness creeping in as the session progresses, down almost 0.1% on the S&P 500. The bond market story looks a little something like this. Yesterday's big bid unwound by only a basis point. We're up a single basis point to 283 on a US 10-year and some mild yen strength in the FX market. Elsewhere, the much-anticipated Dropbox IPO still awaiting its first trade of the NASDAQ, the company offering 36 million shares at $21 apiece, above the targeted range, giving the company a market cap of approximately $8.2 billion. For more, I'm pleased to say we're joined by Alex Barinka, Bloomberg IPO reporter, and you'll be catching up with the leadership a little bit later, Alex. What are the questions for them?
I want to know from CEO Drew Houston, where does the growth story go from here? It's a 10-year company. I just heard him address employees downstairs here at the NASDAQ saying they're looking forward to the next 10 years. I know investors want to know, where does growth get revved up from here, and what are they looking for? And with the stock pricing above the marketed range, seems like the recent volatility didn't really play into investors' demand for the stock. The IPO priced well, so I will be watching closely to see if this trades above 21, because the higher it goes, the closer it gets to that $10 billion private valuation that I'm sure they would love to break through in trading today.
That's a really, really good point, and I'm looking forward to that conversation you'll have with the leadership team of Dropbox a little bit later. Bloomberg's Alex Barinka, thank you. Tune in at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and Alex will be speaking to the Dropbox CEO, Drew Houston, a little bit later. Joining me now is Santosh Rao, Manhattan Ventures Partners Head of Research. Let's talk about that. The private market valuation versus what the valuation will be ultimately when this stock starts trading.
Yeah, as a rule of thumb, I think private market valuations are disconnected from the fundamentals. It's more a supply-demand equation in the private markets. So if you have more demand, you'll see the prices go up. But here you're seeing actual fundamentals trade. So I think the valuation, the $7 to $8 billion, is more correct and more reflective of their fundamentals.
Your firm helps facilitate trading in private markets for companies like Dropbox. Can you talk to me and give me some color about the narrative out there that there is a huge bubble in the private markets and they can attract really attractive valuations there, but they can't achieve them in public markets? What's in that?
Yeah, so what was happening was there wasn't enough supply in the public market, so the big investors went downstream and they really wanted to get in early to get big allocation. So you saw a big demand, big flow of funds into these private markets, and that's what drove the valuations up. So it wasn't really driven by fundamentals as much as companies wanting to get a big share of the private company.
At the core of this company, Santosh, this sort of sync and store kind of capability of a company like Dropbox, that for me seems like old news. What are they going to do that's really going to generate a business model that is going to attract investment long term?
Okay, that's the fundamental question here now, because the core business is commoditized. So the next leg up is in the enterprise market. They need to get these collaboration and content management tools, which is what the enterprises want. So I think the next leg up is going to be very challenging. So we'll see how they manage that. In the consumer market, which they've cornered, they're the leaders there. It's good. I mean, they have 500 million users there, but they're not really able to monetize that.
Yeah.
And that's been a big challenge. So they need to monetize that. They need to add enterprise customers, which are more expensive, longer sales cycles. So you're going to see some challenges to growing their revenue numbers in the long term.
I'm trying to understand what the moat is around the business. What stops, say, Google from coming out and Amazon from coming out and just doing what they're doing? What does stop them?
There is no moat. There's very little
moat at all.
Yeah, absolutely no. I think they just need to execute. They have a user base. Let's see how they do, how they execute on their business model. But there is no moat, and they will have to compete very aggressively. We'll see how it plays out. But that's my big concern. That's why I'm bearish on the stock.
Yeah.
I don't think there's more headwind than tailwind on the stock.
Many companies have come to market and they have been punished and battered if they don't deliver growth. Snap being one, Twitter over the last few years being another. This company does actually have a really solid pays user base. They also have a free user base as well. Can you talk to me a little bit about the conversion rate from free to paid and whether they can really generate some growth there?
Yeah, so I think the conversion rate has been very low. It's about 2%, and that's a big challenge. With these consumer-facing internet companies, software companies, you have to show a good user-based growth. And that's where Snap struggled, that's where Twitter struggled, and they got punished. You have to show a nice path, a growing path of user base. So I think they're going to face that challenge. They need to convert, I don't know what's the right number, but definitely more than 2%. They need to get there. So we'll see where they do that. But I think overall, besides all this, I think it's good for overall. I think Dropbox is following the classic IPO playbook, low float, high demand, good buzz. So it's going to pop on the first day. I can see that. But that's really the IPO pricing. In the long term, when the dust settles, you're going to see that the price come down more towards the 19.
So the bankers have done a good job. Is essentially the message from Santosh Rao.
Absolutely. They followed the classic playbook.
How important is it that this goes well for the other stuff that's in the pipeline?
Yeah, I was going to say that. I think this is very symbolic. It opens up the gate. Now you have Spotify right behind them, DocuSign there, Zorro. So the whole range of companies coming to market, and that's good for the private markets. The monies was locked up for a long time. I think hopefully we'll get back to normal order where companies go public in like 6 to 7 years and not stay private for 10 to 15 years.
Santosh Rao, it's been great to catch up with you.
Thank you.
We will catch up with you, I'm sure, on Spotify a little bit later in the year too. Santosh Rao joining us from Manhattan Venture Partners in the markets. 23 minutes into the session. Following the biggest one-day move lower in about 6 weeks, we bounce back just a touch, up a tenth on the S&P 500 from New York. This is Bloomberg.
Today, innovation in the Finger Lakes is helping build the new New York. Once home to the world's image center, New York State is now a leader in optics, photonics, and imaging, fueled by strong university partnerships, providing the world's best talent, and and supported with workforce development to create even more opportunities. All across New York State, we're building the new New York. To grow your business with us in New York State, visit esd.ny.gov.
Trust, transparency, expertise. These are the building blocks enduring relationships are built on. As investment management professionals, let's measure up. CFA Institute.
It's very important that women support other women. Early in my career, I was head of research. There was another woman who was head of sales, and I'll never forget a meeting that we had. She started the meeting with a brilliant comment. A male colleague said the exact same point, almost word for word, and I chimed in and said, Kate said that a few moments ago. Kate, would you care to elaborate? Women need to be each other's most vocal advocates.
Most ETFs only track a benchmark. FlexShares ETFs are built around the way investors think, with objectives like building capital for the future, managing portfolio risk and liquidity, and generating income. That's real ETF innovation. FlexShares, built by investors, for investors. Before investing, consider the fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses. Go to flexshares.com for a prospectus containing this information. Read it carefully.
This is Bloomberg Markets. I'm Jonathan Ferro. It's time now for the trading diary. What you need to be watching in the week ahead. Sunday is the China Development Forum in Beijing, where we'll likely get the first public comments from the new head of the PBOC. Tuesday, Apple will make an announcement focused on education at a high school in Chicago. Wednesday, we get US GDP, wholesale inventories, and international trade. Thursday, personal income spending. Friday, many global markets will be closed for Good Friday. Coming up at the top of the hour, the conversation on trade continues with the Chinese ambassador to the United States. Do not miss that conversation. 26 minutes into the session, after a move lower, which is the worst since 6 weeks ago, and after a 1 week rout that totals about 4%, we bounce back this Friday up 0.2%. This is Bloomberg TV.
Today's workplace is rapidly changing, and HR professionals must be at the top of their game. Nothing spells that more clearly than SHRM CP and SHRM SCP, the profession's premier competency-based certifications from SHRM. Ongoing training to help you build a thriving workplace and keep your HR career on the move. SHRM CP, SHRM SCP. Credentials that say,
I am ready because I am.
I am
SHRM certified.
Learn more at shrm.org/SHRM certified.
Here is the market update, brought to you by ETF Securities. This market update was brought to you by ETF Securities.
I never dreamed that I'd meet somebody like you. With you.
When did someday become today? Suddenly, everything's smart and social. And sure, a little strange. Hey, nobody can see the future, but Spectrum is ready for it, no matter how wired or Wi-Fi enabled it gets. So bring on tomorrow. Spectrum's working to make it faster and more secure. Spectrum. Think forward.
At the Vein Treatment Center, we treat veins in the legs, hands, face, and breast. Founded by Dr. Navarro, the Vein Treatment Center focuses solely on vein treatment. Dr. Navarro pioneered patented techniques to make treating spider and varicose veins faster and pain-free. At the Vein Treatment Center, we develop new techniques to remove unsightly veins more quickly and with better aesthetic results. Call the Vein Treatment Center for your free consultation today.
10 a.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in London, and 10 p.m. in Hong Kong. I'm Sherry Ann.
And I'm Julie Hyman in for Vonnie Quinn. Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. And we're going to start with some breaking news here on new home sales for the month of February. That data crossing the Bloomberg in just moments after we had durable goods orders beating estimates earlier today. New home sales coming in largely in line with estimates, but there is a sizable month earlier revision. 618,000, that's the annual pace of new home sales in the month of February. 620,000 was the estimate, so pretty close to that level. The January number, however, was revised higher to 622,000. That means there was a month-over-month drop of 0.6%, but nonetheless relatively stable here when it comes to these new home sales. And this doesn't tend to be that much of a market-moving number, but just helps us understand the overall housing picture as we start to see mortgage rates go higher. And Abigail Doolittle is with us to get a check on the markets. About now half an hour into the trading session, we've got a mixed picture, Abigail.
You're right about that, Julie, and relatively small moves after yesterday's big sell-off. We do have the Dow and the S&P 500 slightly to modestly higher. The tech-heavy NASDAQ down fractionally, down about 0.1%. This after yesterday's big sell-off, the worst day since February 8th on trade war concerns, continued Facebook fallout. Today what we're looking at is the chip sector falling out of bed, down more than 1%, the stocks. And let's take a look at some of the movers there because we have lots of red for the chip space. Micron down 6%. That's really the culprit. They beat earnings, but the sales guide disappointing some analysts. Those shares selling off. In fact, Citigroup downgraded shares to a neutral. The stock, of course, priced to perfection, up about 500% since its 2016 low. They just didn't deliver, and that's weighing on the entire space. Now, of course, this week has been all about volatility. Let's hop into the Bloomberg and take a look at G #BTV 36805. And this is a 6-month chart of the weekly moves, and we see last year relatively small moves that helped the S&P 500 and the other averages climb. Then in January, big gains. February, the huge sell-off, some whipsaws. And now, Julie and Sherry, we are looking at another week of declines. The NASDAQ down the most, down about 4%. Very interesting, though. The Russell 2000 in orange down just 2.8%, outperforming the other major averages because, of course, those domestic companies, Sherry, that receive more revenue from the U.S., less affected by a potential trade war, Sherry.
Abigail Doolittle, thank you so much for that. Now, the trade conflict, as Abigail mentioned, between China and the U.S. escalated, with Beijing announcing its first retaliation against metals levies hours after President Trump outlined fresh tariffs on $50 billion of Chinese imports. Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie reports from Beijing.
China's decision to hit the US with tariffs of its own is a warning shot rather than a full-blown counterattack. Beijing wants to avoid a trade war that could derail its economy and make tackling domestic issues like debt more difficult. Policymakers here have made overtures offering to open up new sectors to foreign investment and sending top-level officials to Washington to try to ease tensions. But China also says it's unafraid of a trade war with the US if tensions continue to rise. American soybean exports, tech companies like Apple and Intel, and aircraft maker Boeing could be targeted if China decides on a more aggressive response. The nuclear option would be selling down its holdings of US treasuries or devaluing the yuan. Neither are seen as likely at this stage, but China has no shortage of tools at its disposal. Tom McKenzie, Bloomberg, Beijing.
For more on China's response and what's ahead for U.S. and China relations, let's bring in China's ambassador to the U.S., Sui Tiankai, who's with us from Washington. Ambassador, thank you very much for your time. Tom McKenzie, our reporter on the ground, was mentioning some options that the Chinese government could be weighing at the moment. Are you prepared for more action?
Well, thank you. We are clearly against any unilateral and protectionist moves. We don't want to have a trade war with anybody. We are still trying to avoid one. But if a trade war is forced on us, we have to fight back.
How are you prepared to fight back?
We will take all the measures necessary. I think you have already seen the announcement made by the Chinese Ministry of Commerce. And we will see what we'll do next.
So what areas do you believe, Ambassador, there are for cooperation between the U.S. and China?
I think there is a great potential and indeed good prospects for cooperation between China and the United States. But the key is that both sides have to take a cooperative and a constructive approach. A confrontational one will not help anybody. And besides, a lot of accusations made this time are not supported by evidence. For instance, Chinese laws protect intellectual property rights, and we are ready to help any business that see violations. But there's no evidence provided. It helps nobody to make sweeping accusations.
There are some laws, though, Ambassador, in China that when foreign firms have to work within China, you do have to transfer some of the technology know-how, which is one of the points that the Trump administration is fighting against. Do you believe that there are no areas of cooperation when it comes to intellectual property theft, of allegations of it?
There's no law or regulation in China that would force technology transfer. There's no such a law. And I think businesses will only make the deals that they believe are good for them. But if they have any complaints, they should resort to Chinese law, and we will help them.
The U.S. Trade Representative has yet to come out with a final list of tariff items, and they will do so in the next 2 weeks. Do you expect any concessions or coordination on which items could be included or left out?
We always believe that any disputes, any differences between the two countries should be worked out by dialogue and consultation. But we certainly will not yield to any threat, coercion, or intimidation.
These sort of U.S. actions, will they have any impact on China's support in dealing with North Korea?
Well, I think that these two issues are different ones. But at the same time, if anything is done that would undermine the broad mutual confidence between the two countries, it might affect other areas. But we'll have to wait and see.
Those areas include foreign policy?
We'll see what is done by the U.S. side, then we'll decide.
Bloomberg News also reported that China could be considering